Hello and welcome to Not Quite episode 41 of the Best Games Period. I'm your host, Jack Gardner. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty recording actual episode 41, which you will be hearing next week. In the meantime, this week I'm finally going to sit down and re-record my honorable mention for the one, the only, Skies of Arcadia. And I guess it's not really the only, because specifically today we are going to be talking about Skies of Arcadia Legends, the re-released version of Skies of Arcadia for GameCube. One of the things to understand about this game is that it originally released in 2000 for the Sega Dreamcast, and was actually heralded as one of the best RPGs that you could play on the Dreamcast. And to this day, still rates very highly in like the top 10 games that were available for the system. So understandably, when Dreamcast kind of bit the bullet, shall we say, it was one of the more popular games that people wanted to play on other systems. And it eventually came to GameCube with a few minor retouches. Now, so there were a few differences between the two versions of the game. Part of that is when it released on Dreamcast, it released in 2 discs. On the GameCube, there was only 1 disc. That led to one major difference between the two versions. In order to fit on that 1 disc, the music for the game had to be degraded slightly. So the music for the Dreamcast version is actually of a slightly higher quality. In addition to that, the original Dreamcast version from 2000 had... Everyone remembers the really bulky controllers that the Dreamcast had. They weren't bad controllers by any means, but they were large. So the controllers had this thing called the VMU, the Visual Memory Unit. And they functioned as a memory card, but they also had additional function for like secondary gaming functions. So there were a lot of mini games that were attached to the VMU and little tiny extras. It had like a built-in real-time clock, a screen. It had a tiny D-pad, A and B buttons. And so for Skies of Arcadia on the Dreamcast, there was this RPG minigame that you could play, and any of the items and gold and experience that you got in that could then be transferred over into the main game via the VMU, which was kind of neat. So far, 2 things that the GameCube version didn't have. It didn't have superior sound, and it also didn't have this VMU minigame that was called Pinta's Quest. However, it did have a lot of things that the Dreamcast version didn't have, and I would argue these things make it the slightly superior version. So, it had faster loading times, which you might think, well, that's not that big of a deal, right? Because, I mean, you load into the game, you load into different areas. Once you're there, it's not that big of a deal. However, one of the biggest complaints about Skies of Arcadia from critics at the time, and if you go back and play it today, still kind of holds up, there are a lot of random battles. A lot. Like, a staggering number of them. In fact, that's one of the biggest things that I hold against the game. And I love Skies of Arcadia. The GameCube version has reduced load times in between battles. So in kind of older school RPGs, if you got into a random encounter, it would have to load into the special battle system, scene, whatever you want to call it. And, those times add up. Like, you probably, if you played this on the Dreamcast, you probably ended up spending... over the entire course of the game, you probably ended up spending like maybe an hour just waiting for battles to load or unloading screens. So eliminating that, kind of pretty great. So that's one big difference. The other big difference, there were, like, for its time in 2000, the animation and graphics of Skies of Arcadia were incredible. Now, if going back to it, it hasn't aged that well. However, the GameCube version boasts superior polygon counts, which make things look a little bit nicer, especially in the face areas. If you compare the two, there's not a huge difference, but it's enough that you'd notice it. Slightly more palatable on the GameCube version. More importantly for Skies of Arcadia Legends, and why I'm talking about that game in particular today instead of the original for Dreamcast. There are multiple storylines that are present in the GameCube version that weren't in the Dreamcast version, and those things include there's this really significant side quest where you have to collect these creatures that are kind of scattered throughout the world of Skies of Arcadia, and you collect them and you can feed them to this weird creature, and as you feed them to the creature, you kind of get snippets of backstory of different characters, and it kind of gives you a little bit more insight into what's going on. There's also bounty quests, which lead to these really interesting boss fights against a colorful array of rogue pirates that are interesting, and also some of the hardest fights in the game. And, I mean, if you're playing an RPG and you really like it, you want to get the most out of it, so it's kind of nice having these additional boss fights scattered around the world. And interestingly enough, they all scale with your level. So no matter how much you grind, they're still going to be difficult fights. Which kind of leads to, it lends a little bit more challenge to the game. You need to make sure you're strategizing correctly for those fights. Additionally, there is an interesting side quest that's added to Legends that involves essentially this lady who's like the angel of death, and she's come to seeking revenge against the main character because she thinks that he had a role in the death of her father. And that's just kind of a really interesting thing. And so there are all these little differences, and that's several storylines that aren't in the original. And I just think that gives it a little bit of an edge, along with the improved performance and visuals, and even at the cost of some of the sound quality, I'd still go with Skies of Arcadia Legends. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the re-released GameCube version from 2003. Geez, I took a long time explaining that. So, Skies of Arcadia, what is it? Well, I don't want to go through the story point by point, but if I had to kind of sum up the story, it's a very, it doesn't stray very far from what you might consider your typical RPG formula, right? So you have a young squad of protagonists. So you have Vice and Ica. They're both 17-year-old sky pirates. And that's right, I said sky pirates because this game is about sky pirates. Get excited! I'm getting ahead of myself. So, Skies of Arcadia takes place in a world where there are no oceans. Instead, all of the land masses in the world float in the sky. And in order to get between these different islands, people have to use these ships that look like traditional sailing ships that can just fly through the sky. It's a world teeming with a wide array of politics between the different nations that inhabit the world. And in all of this seething cauldron of political tensions, you have the sky pirates, the blue rogues, they're called. And these blue rogues are just one faction of several sky pirate factions, and they make a point of harassing the armada of the Valuan Empire. And the Valuans are just kind of power-hungry and imperialistic, and they are always seeking to find new ways to take over other places. The game kicks off in an almost Star Wars-y fashion. There's a big Valuan ship that's chasing after a small, damaged ship. On the ship is this girl in kind of a silver white dress, and they manage to capture her, but as they're trying to kind of take her into custody, the blue rogues then board the Valuan vessel and steal the girl and kidnap her instead and take her back to kind of their base of operations. And that, in turn, sets off this quest, because she obviously has amnesia. Her name's Fina, and surprise, she's also a 17-year-old girl, and wow, our three main protagonists are now in the picture and are soon set off on an adventure without going into a lot of details because this is a very long game. I have put several hundred hours into playing this game and replaying it, so I don't want to get into the nitty-gritties. As a general arc, right? I'm trying to avoid spoilers because I'd like you to play it. I'd like you to enjoy it. It's a fun game. Basically, there are different nations for each moon that orbit the world of Skies of Arcadia. And each moon also corresponds to a different kind of magic that the player can use in fights. However, long, long ago in the mists of history, the nations were much more technologically advanced than they are now, and they managed to create these weapons of mass destruction, these bio-weapons called Gygus. And each nation had their own Gygus, and there was this humongous world war that didn't really end until the Silver Nation, the nation of the Silver Moon, unleashed what they call the Rains of Destruction that essentially almost wiped out all life on their planet. It managed to shut down all of the enemy Gygus, and the Silver Civilization realized, hey, maybe we shouldn't just have ready access to this weapon because we almost annihilated all life on the planet. So they sealed away their Gygus, and then they also sealed away all the control crystals for the other nation's Gygus, so they couldn't be reawakened. Well, the Valuan Empire knows about the existence of the Gygus, and they're on a mission to get the control crystals so they can start reawakening the Gygus and then take over the world. However, Fina winds up being a member of the ancient Sylvite civilization, the civilization of the Silver Moon, and she has been sent by their Council of Elders to obtain and safeguard these crystals so they don't fall into the wrong hands. And so Weiss and Ica agree to help her, and on their quest to stop the Valuan Empire and their vast fleet of warships, they encounter a bunch of other characters who they convince to help them. Importantly, there's Gilder, who's kind of this, I guess what you would think of as like a dashing grown-up pirate. He's smooth talking with the ladies, he's handsome, he's kind of a romantic, he has a thing going with another pirate captain, and he has a cool little parrot guy. And then there's Enrique, who's the young prince of the Valuan Empire, who winds up through a series of events, winds up supporting Weiss, Ica, and Fina, because he doesn't believe in his empire's warmongering ways, but is kind of in a powerless position to stop it. And then finally you have my personal favorite character from Skies of Arcadia, and that is Captain Drachma, who's he's a perfect example of why you need more older characters in video games, because they're awesome. Captain Drachma, right? He's essentially just a fishing boat captain who stumbles across the three protagonists. But he's loosely based, and when I say loosely, he's very solidly based on Captain Ahab from Moby Dick. He lost his leg and an arm to this gigantic flying sky whale named Rachnam, and has been on a lifelong quest to kill it ever since. And so he doesn't have he doesn't have the arm or leg, but he has a robot arm and a robot leg. Not only that, he is so committed to killing this sky whale that he outfits his ship with a gigantic, rocket-powered harpoon. That's commitment. And that's the kind of thing where, we need more older characters in our RPGs, because that's great. There need to be more characters like that. And, of course, as you progress through the story, you find out that it's more than just his arm and leg that motivate him to hunt down Rachnam. And there's a really satisfying conclusion to that arc that I won't spoil. And so your journey to get these crystals kind of takes you to each nation, and they do a lot of interesting stuff. Each nation kind of has their own dungeon type area, but there are a lot of wrinkles along the way. And it's not quite as straightforward as you might think. And at the beginning of this honorable mention, I talked about how it's it sticks pretty close to the formula of RPGs. And I think a lot of times when people say that something sticks to formula, that's not seen as a good thing. Like, formula is bad. You want to be doing new things. But I think Skies of Arcadia is a perfect example of when it's okay to stick to formula. Because it's fine to stick to formula, to well-known territory, as long as you do it well. And Skies of Arcadia does it really, really well, and it does its own thing with kind of these traditional tropes and mechanics. So, yeah, the RPG combat system is nothing you haven't seen before in an RPG. It's really traditional turn-based gameplay. However, what makes it really interesting are the characters that populate this world, the odd things, the cool technology, the weird little quirks that they throw in all over the place. For example, each Gygus is really different and unique. Like, one of them is like this giant green colossus, and another one is like almost a Death Star. The designs are interesting and maybe not what you're expecting. And each of these places feels unique, but also familiar because it's sticking close to those tropes. So, like, of course, there's kind of a sandy fire nation, and then there's the forest nation, and then there's the ice area, and like all these different things. They're very tropish, but they're presented in a new way that makes them feel fresh and not necessarily as hackneyed or forced as you might imagine them to be. And on top of that, you have what I think are some of the most interesting mechanics. Like I just mentioned, the random encounters, the turn-based battle system isn't that terribly interesting. The most interesting thing it does is you can accumulate kind of these power points and then spend them on special attacks, and that's kind of the interesting wrinkle to the combat. However, the really interesting thing that Skies of Arcadia does, and something that I would love to see almost an entire game built around, there are also ship-to-ship battles that operate in a completely different way from traditional turn-based fighting systems in RPGs. So as you progress through the game, you can outfit your ship with new and better gear, customize the hull, what kinds of weapons it uses. You can use miniguns, torpedoes, cannons, heavy cannons, sub-cannons. You got all kinds of different weapons, and then each ship you end up getting can use different super weapons. And instead of a traditional turn-based system where, okay, we're firing the sub-cannons now, and then the enemy is doing something, and then we're firing the cannon. Instead, what happens is you plan out a entire series of maneuvers, and you can see the likely course of action that your enemies will take. There's kind of a predictive element to it. And so you need to plan accordingly or risk taking a lot of damage in order to get off a super move of your own, or all these different little things that are really interesting and fun. And then it all plays out, it's all animated, and the battle plays out from interesting and different camera angles. I've never seen another game with a system like that. It's really unique and interesting, and I like it a lot. I think at the time when I played it back, I probably played it back in 2005, 2004, somewhere in there. I thought it was one of the coolest things I'd seen in a long, long time, and that concept is still really cool to me. Update that, bring it to a new age of gamers, and I think you'd have an indie game that people would, at the very least, it would find a really interesting niche in the indie game market. But I'm kind of getting away from Skies of Arcadia itself. So our characters take off on this adventure to get all of these moon crystals, and over the course of the game, there are a number of different revelations or boss fights or changes in international politics, and that I'm not getting into the minutia of that or anything, but there are interesting things that happen, and one of those that pertains to the gameplay specifically, at one point in the middle of the game, you found your own pirate base, and then you can build different pieces of it that give different benefits, convey different rewards, and at that point you can start recruiting pirates for your new pirate base, and they then crew your ship. And one of the special attacks you can use summons your entire crew to come help you, and each crew member does a unique or interesting thing. And that's a really interesting way of rewarding players for going out of their way and recruiting people. And like some of them do damage to enemies, some of them heal you, some of them do other weird things, some of them buff you, all this stuff. It's really, I really enjoy it. I really think that there needs to be more in games. You can't just have people collect things. There should be a tangible reward in the gameplay for what you've done. And Skies of Arcadia does that, and it does it at a time when that wasn't really common in games. Early 2000s was more collectathons and just collecting things for the sake of collecting things. Skies of Arcadia kind of took that to another level. It was in a way kind of forward thinking for the time. And on top of that, for players like me who really like exploring all the different areas, Skies of Arcadia rewards you for being thorough. In the game, there is a Sailors Guild, and whenever you discover something new, you can then sell information about it to the Sailors Guild. And so there's this interesting little reward for finding new things. And there are some weird things, like there's a flying turtle that's just flying around out there, or there's a monster high up in the clouds that's so big you actually have to fight it with your ship. So there are weird things out there, and it rewards curiosity, and I like that. I want more games to reward players for going off the beaten path. And I think it's worth noting that in Skies of Arcadia, yes, one of my biggest complaints about it is the rate at which you encounter random fights, random monsters. But at a certain point in the game, you gain the ability to fly high above the clouds. So in this world, there are air currents that prevent you from going to certain places. They just can't fly too high, and they can't fly too low. They have to kind of fly in this sweet spot. Well, at a certain point in the game, you unlock this technology that allows you to fly above the clouds and then later below the clouds. And when you get that technology, you can essentially avoid random encounters in the overworld by just flying above the clouds, which is super useful and really, at least for me, vastly improves the game experience. You just kind of have to slog through the initial furious pace, shall we say, of the random encounters. It ends in a really effective climax, and it's exciting and fun, and I would just suggest, if you can, going out and playing Skies of Arcadia, specifically Skies of Arcadia Legends. I honestly think it is one of the best RPGs out there. Like, I think it holds its own next to larger franchises, and I think it's a huge shame that a sequel hasn't been made, or that it hasn't been completely remade like the upcoming Final Fantasy VII, but it is what it is, and it is a fantastic RPG experience from the early 2000s. unfortunately, since the release on GameCube, there is no other way of playing Skies of Arcadia aside from emulation, which falls into some murky legal waters. And if you want to buy a used copy of it, I briefly Googled this before recording the show, but there were prices for this on GameCube ranging from like $75 to $200. So that's a bit steep. And not only that, but if you're looking for the Dreamcast version, the prices get even steeper. And you're looking at about $300 for a Dreamcast version of Skies of Arcadia. So that's really kind of disheartening, and I was frankly shocked that it was never made its way to Virtual Console on any of Nintendo's other systems. I really don't know what to say, but I do think that if you are someone who's super interested in RPGs, Skies of Arcadia is a game you need to play. It's a very competently done RPG. The combat system, the traditional turn-based combat system is decent. The ship-to-ship battle system is incredible, and I've never seen in any other game. And the story is actually really competent while using kind of a series of cliches from RPG, the standard RPG bag of tricks. And not only that, I think where it truly shines are the characters and the writing that really makes those characters shine and attaches the player to them. One of the highlights of the game for me came in the middle of the game, and it's a confrontation between the Valoan prince, Enrique, and his uncle, and this battle between the two ships ensues, where it's kind of just a clash of their personalities and their differing ideologies, but they still have that love for each other that they're sharing during the battle, and it's really well done. So if you can find a copy of this game on the cheap, immediately go for it. If you see it at a garage sale for like $10, pick it up. Even if you can find it somewhere for like maybe even $50, $60, that's probably a steal. I don't know if I can recommend, investing $200 into it, because that is obscenely expensive. But if you are one of those people who's really into quality RPG experiences, Skies of Arcadia is a game you cannot miss out on. And with that, I am going to tell you a little bit about Extra Life, which is coming up here. What is Extra Life? Good question, me. Extra Life is a 24-hour video game charity event that takes place this year on November 5th, and players all across the United States and Canada are coming together to play video games and raise money for sick and injured kids in hospitals. How exactly does that work? It's kind of like any other community charity drive, with a few very important differences. So, much like a Relay for Life, people who sign up collect pledges from their friends, family, strangers to support their cause. However, where it's different is the people who sign up can choose which Children's Miracle Network hospital they will be playing for. And 100% of everything they raise from friends, family, and strangers goes directly to that hospital. There are no fees taken off the top to, support administration or anything like that. Everything you raise goes directly to the hospital for sick and injured kids. The money pays for their treatments. There are other charities out there that make kids more comfortable in hospitals, that make hospitals a less scary place, and those are fantastic. But Extra Life actually pays for their treatments, which is very, very, very important. So, what if you want to learn more? Like, what if this random podcast stinger didn't explain everything you wanted to know? Well, you can head over to extra-life.org And, you can actually sign up there, or you can, there's a nice little frequently asked questions page. You can click through that, learn a little bit more about what it's all about. Extra Life is a part of Children's Miracle Network Hospitals, if you've heard of them before, so very reputable charity organization. And if this seems like something that you or your friends or family would be interested in doing, let them know. And you know what? If you can't participate, you can always donate. And if you can't participate on November 5th, it's a very grassroots movement. So however far you want to take it is up to you. If you want to do it on November 4th, if you want to do it on November 6th, if you want to do it at a different time that fits into your calendar schedule, you can do it then. We take donations all the way up till the end of the year. Extra Life takes donations all the way up until the end of the year. And not only that, it doesn't have to be a 24-hour marathon. If you don't have time for that, because let's face it, not everyone does, you can break it up into segments. And you know what? Some people say 24 hours, not enough. I want to go 72 hours. We've had people at Extra Life team up and rally, play games, stream them online, and take turns rallying that stream and go for a week straight. Really, however far you want to take it is entirely up to you. Just head over to extra-life.org and learn more over there, or sign up. And you know what? If you love this cause and don't necessarily have the time to participate, you can always just tell people about it. That's really effective. You can donate to a friend, family, or a stranger. Always looking for donations. Every little bit helps, and all of it goes directly to helping kids in need. And if you want to get involved on the community end of things, you can head over to community.extra-life.org, where you will find episodes of this very podcast, The Best Games Period, along with, interesting news articles, reviews, features, interviews with all kinds of people throughout the game industry, as well as a number of individuals, as well as hundreds of individuals from the Extra Life community who are highly motivated to join local guilds. So you can connect with the Extra Life community or just learn more about gaming stuff over on community.extra-life.org. So, all of that being said, if you enjoyed this honorable mention of the best games period, we'd love it if you left us a review on iTunes. You can find us on iTunes. We are hosted on Libsyn. You can also listen to us on SoundCloud. We're also on Twitter at Best Games Period. And, just let us know what you think of the show. Let us know what you think of the games we're talking about. Let us know if you think we're right. Let us know if you think we're wrong. And just let us know. We love hearing from people who love the games we're talking about, or even from the people who really disagree with the things we're saying on the show about certain games. The podcast is all about starting a discussion and trying to aim it in a positive way towards some of the best games that have ever been made. And with that, I will conclude this episode of the Best Games Period, this mini episode, this honorable mention episode of the Best Games Period. As Daniel would say, see you on the flippity-dippity.